widow was returning home when she suddenly heard a whimpering sound coming from an alley. When she approached, it was a dog. Jen pulled her coat tightly around herself as she walked home, the cold night air biting at her exposed skin. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional flickering street lamp and the distant hum of traffic. She preferred it this way, silent, isolated, undisturbed. It had been years since she had cared about anything beyond her daily routine: work, home, sleep, repeat. The days blurred together, each one as meaningless as the last. Once, she had known warmth, laughter at the dinner table, the soft voices of her husband and son filling the house, but all of that had been stolen from her in an instant, a car accident that had left her alone in the world. Now she avoided people. Conversations were exhausting, small talk unbearable. It was easier to keep to herself, to live in a bubble of solitude where nothing could touch her. Then she heard it, a faint whimper, barely audible over the rustling wind. Jen stopped in her tracks, straining to listen. The sound came again, weak and desperate. She turned her head, scanning the dimly lit alley beside her. At first, she saw nothing but discarded trash and abandoned boxes. Then, movement. A small, shivering shape curled up between two dumpsters. A puppy. It was barely more than skin and bones, its fur matted with dirt. Jen hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to keep walking. It wasn't her problem. She wasn't responsible for saving anything or anyone. But then, the puppy lifted its head and looked at her. Its eyes were too big for its frail body, dark and pleading. Jen's breath caught in her throat. She had seen eyes like that before. Not long after the accident, when she had spent days staring at her reflection in the mirror, wondering how she was still breathing when they were not. Against every wall she had built around herself, her body moved on its own. She stepped forward, carefully kneeling beside the trembling creature. The puppy flinched, but didn't run. It was too weak. She reached out, her fingers brushing against its cold fur. "Hey there, little one," she murmured, surprised at how foreign her own voice sounded. "What are you doing out here?" The puppy whimpered again, curling tighter into itself. Jen sighed, pulling her scarf from around her neck. Gently, she wrapped it around the small body, lifting it into her arms. The puppy barely weighed anything. As she stood, she realized what she was doing. She was bringing it home. She who had sworn off attachments. She who had convinced herself that caring only led to loss. Yet as the tiny body trembled against her chest, a strange warmth spread through her. For the first time in years, she wasn't walking home alone, and that thought terrified her more than anything. Jen pushed the door open with her shoulder, stepping into the dimly lit apartment. The warmth inside was a stark contrast to the freezing cold outside, but the tiny bundle in her arms remained stiff, barely moving. She hurried to the couch, gently placing the puppy down onto the soft cushion. Its small body shivered violently, its fur damp and cold. Jen bit her lip, unsure of what to do next. She hadn't taken care of anything in years, hadn't needed to. Yet now, this fragile life depended on her. "All right," she muttered to herself, running a hand through her hair. "Think." She grabbed an old towel from the bathroom, returning quickly to wrap the puppy in it. Its breathing was shallow, its ribs visible beneath its thin coat. It needed warmth. Without thinking, she pulled the towel-wrapped puppy closer to her chest, holding it against her body. It was so light. Too light. A pang of sadness stabbed at her as she realized just how close it had been to death minutes past. Slowly, she felt the trembling lessen. The puppy's breathing steadied, its tiny body pressing against her in a silent plea for safety. Jen let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Now, food. She stood, carefully placing the puppy on the couch before rushing to the kitchen. There wasn't much. She lived alone, and cooking for one had never seemed worth the effort. But she found some leftover rice and warmed up a bowl of milk. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She returned to the living room, setting the bowl down in front of the puppy. "Come on, little one," she coaxed softly. "You need to eat." The puppy barely reacted. Its eyes flickered open for a brief moment before closing again, its exhaustion overwhelming. Jen frowned, worry creeping into her chest. It was too weak to eat, too weak to even move. She dipped her fingers into the milk, letting a few drops fall onto its nose. The reaction was instant. The tiny tongue darted out, licking the liquid hesitantly. Encouraged, Jen dipped her fingers again, this time bringing them to the puppy's mouth. It licked again, slower this time, as if the act itself was exhausting. For the next hour, Jen fed the puppy drop by drop, refusing to let it slip away. By the end, its breathing was a little steadier, its body a little less tense. As she sat back, exhaustion washing over her, she realized something. She had spent years avoiding attachments, locking herself away from anything that could make her feel again, and yet here she was, in the middle of the night, fighting to save a life. She glanced at the small creature curled up beside her, its tiny frame rising and falling with each slow breath. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as lost as she thought. Jen woke up to the soft sound of breathing. For a moment, she didn't remember falling asleep on the couch, but then she felt the warmth of the tiny body curled up beside her. The puppy was still alive. She sat up carefully, her muscles stiff from the awkward sleeping position. The small creature lay nestled in the folds of the towel, its breathing steady, its tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythmic motion. It was the first time she had allowed someone, this close to her in years. A small sigh escaped her lips as she ran a hand through her unkempt hair. "Well, I guess you're staying," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to the puppy or herself. The thought should have made her anxious. She'd built a life of solitude, distancing herself from everything that could bring her pain. Letting this fragile life in meant responsibility, meant caring, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. But then, as if hearing her hesitation, the puppy stirred. Its dark eyes opened slowly, looking up at her. It was the first time it had really looked at her since she found it. And in that gaze, Jen saw something familiar, something she had felt before. Fear, uncertainty, a desperate hope buried beneath layers of exhaustion. She exhaled, shaking her head at herself. "All right then, let's figure this out together." The puppy's ears twitched as she carefully picked it up, cradling it against her chest. It was warmer now, not as fragile as the night before, though still far from healthy. She carried it to the small kitchen, setting it gently on a folded blanket while she prepared some food. This time, when she placed the bowl of warm milk and soft rice in front of it, the puppy lifted its head slightly. It sniffed the bowl hesitantly before sticking out its tiny tongue, lapping at the milk. Jen felt an unexpected sense of relief wash over her. "You're a fighter, huh?" she murmured, watching as the puppy ate in slow, careful movements. Her chest tightened at the thought. It reminded her of herself, wounded, struggling, barely making it through each day, but still fighting. She leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, watching the tiny creature. "You need a name," she said thoughtfully. Naming it meant admitting that this wasn't temporary, that she was keeping it, that she was allowing something into her life again. The puppy let out a tiny sound between a whimper and a yawn, making her chuckle. "How about Milo?" she offered. The name came out of nowhere, but as soon as she said it, it felt right. Milo. A new name, a new beginning. The puppy lifted its head slightly, blinking at her, and, for the first time, Jen felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone anymore. Milo's recovery was slow but steady. Each day he grew a little stronger, his frail body gaining weight, his once dull eyes now more alert. Jen found herself adjusting to the unexpected routine, warming milk in the mornings, cleaning up tiny messes, and making sure the little pup had a comfortable place to rest. It had been years since she had cared for anything other than herself. The realization struck her one evening as she sat on the couch, watching Milo nibble at the soft food she had prepared. She had spent so much of her life pushing people away, choosing isolation over vulnerability. Yet here she was, worrying over every bite Milo took, every small movement he made. And strangely, it didn't feel like a burden. But Milo wasn't just recovering physically. He was learning to trust. At first, he flinched whenever Jen reached for him. If she moved too quickly, his tiny body would tense, as if expecting pain. The first time she gently placed her hand on his head, he froze completely, his ears flattened. Jen's heart ached at the sight. Someone had hurt him before, that much was clear. So she gave him space. She let him come to her on his own terms. At night, she slept on the couch, not wanting to leave him alone. In the dark, she often felt the tiniest shift of weight against her blanket, as if Milo was creeping closer when he thought she wouldn't notice. Then, one morning, something changed. Ha was preparing breakfast when she felt something warm press against her ankle. She looked down, startled. Milo was standing beside her, his little body pressed against her leg for warmth. His eyes, once wary and distant, now held something different, something softer. It was trust. A lump formed in her throat as she knelt down carefully, holding out her hand. This time, Milo didn't flinch. Instead, he took a hesitant step forward and nudged her fingers with his nose. Jen let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice almost trembling. Milo's tiny tail wagged. It was a small moment, but to Jen, it felt like something monumental. That night, when she lay on the couch, she didn't have to wait long. She felt the familiar weight of Milo creeping onto the blanket beside her. He curled up against her ribs, letting out a small sigh of contentment. For the first time in years, Jen didn't feel the crushing emptiness that had haunted her for so long. She reached out, hesitantly at first, and placed a gentle hand on Milo's back. For the first time, he didn't pull away. For the first time, she felt whole again. For the first time in years, Jen woke up to something other than silence. A tiny, warm body was curled up against her side, breathing softly. The weight of it was unfamiliar but comforting. She blinked, adjusting to the dim morning light, and found herself staring at Milo, who was still fast asleep. She had spent so many mornings dreading the start of another day. Waking up had always meant dragging herself out of bed, drinking stale coffee and forcing herself to go through the motions of a life she no longer felt connected to. But today felt different. There was a quiet presence beside her, a reason to get up. Carefully, she shifted her position, trying not to wake him, but the small movement caused Milo to stir. His tiny body stretched, his paws reaching forward as he let out a soft yawn. His eyes blinked open sleepily, and for the first time, when he looked at Jen, there was no fear, only trust. A small, involuntary smile tugged at her lips. "Morning, buddy," she murmured. Milo blinked again, then, to her surprise, his little tail gave a slow, tentative wag. Pa felt something tighten in her chest. She had spent years running from emotions, from attachments, from anything that could make her feel vulnerable again. And yet, in just a few days, this tiny, fragile creature had cracked open something inside her, something she thought had died long ago. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly over Milo's head. This time, he didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed into her touch, a quiet sigh escaping him. It was such a small thing, yet it meant everything. Over the next few days, Jen found herself slipping into an unexpected routine. She started waking up earlier, not because she had to, but because Milo was there, waiting for her. The moment she stirred, his tiny tail would start wagging, and he would look up at her with expectant eyes. She found herself talking to him more than she had spoken to another person in months. "You're a messy eater," she'd chuckle as he clumsily lapped up his milk. "And you snore louder than I do," she'd tease when he slept sprawled out beside her. It was ridiculous. It was unfamiliar. And yet, for the first time in forever, she didn't feel so alone. One afternoon, as she sat on the couch reading, Milo trotted up to her and placed a paw on her knee. She glanced down at him. "What?" she asked, amused. Milo let out a tiny huff. Then, with surprising determination, he scrambled onto the couch and curled up beside her. His small body pressed against her hip, his head resting near her leg. Jen swallowed the lump in her throat. She had saved him. But maybe, just maybe, he was saving her too. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Jen found herself adjusting to a life that no longer felt so empty. Milo was no longer the frail, shivering creature she had found on that freezing night. His tiny frame had filled out, his once dull fur now soft and healthy. He had energy now, real energy. He would trot after her whenever she moved around the apartment, his small paws clicking against the wooden floor. Every morning, he woke her up, nuzzling against her hand or letting out a soft whimper until she stirred. He no longer feared her touch. Instead, he sought it, pressing his head into her palm whenever she reached for him. It was a silent acknowledgement, a quiet trust that had taken time to build. One particular morning, Jen sat on the kitchen floor, watching Milo eat. His little tail wagged happily as he chewed on his food, oblivious to the thoughts racing through her mind. It had been years since she had taken care of anyone, years since she had allowed herself to care. She glanced around the apartment. It was still the same small space she had lived in for years, but somehow it felt different now. Warmer, livelier. She thought back to how quiet it used to be, just the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Now, there was movement, sound, life. The soft padding of Milo's feet as he explored the apartment, the occasional bark when he got excited, the way he huffed dramatically whenever he wanted attention. It made her wonder, how had she lived in silence for so long? Milo finished eating and trotted over to her, his eyes bright with curiosity. He let out a tiny bark, his first one since she had taken him in. Ha chuckled. "Oh, so you do have a voice," she teased, scratching behind his ear. His tail wagged even faster, his tiny body leaning into her touch. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing by the front door, leash in hand. It had been a long time since she had gone anywhere other than work or the grocery store, but something about the way Milo looked at her, ears perked up, tail swaying, made her hesitate. "All right," she sighed, kneeling down to clip the leash onto his tiny collar. "Let's give this a try." The moment they stepped outside, Milo's entire body tensed with excitement. His nose twitched as he took in the sense of the world beyond the apartment, his paws practically skipping as he walked beside her. Jen couldn't help but smile. It was a quiet neighborhood. Jen had lived here for years but had never bothered to notice the details. The children playing in the park, the old man sitting on his porch, the woman walking her dog down the street. Before Milo, Ha had only seen these things from a distance, an outsider in her own life. But now, Milo pulled her into the present. A woman with a golden retriever smiled at her as they passed. "He's adorable," she said, nodding toward Milo. Jen hesitated for a moment before managing a small smile. "Thank you." She hadn't realized how long it had been since she had spoken to a stranger, let alone received a smile from one. Milo, oblivious to Jen's hesitation, bounded forward, sniffing curiously at the retriever. Ha watched him, her heart warming at the sight. As they walked, she noticed something else. Milo wasn't just observing the world, he was engaging with it. He stopped to sniff the grass, perked up at the sound of children laughing, and even wagged his tail at a passing cyclist. Watching him, Jen felt something stir deep inside her. She had spent so long keeping the world at arm's length, afraid to feel, afraid to lose again. But Milo, in his small, unassuming way, was showing her that there was still joy to be found. She had saved him from the cold, from hunger, from a life of suffering, but in doing so she had unknowingly saved herself too. For the first time in years, Jen didn't feel like a ghost drifting through life. She felt real, she felt present, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she belonged.